Y'all make sure y'all remember that. You're going to look somewhere. And you better look up to the Lord. That's not my text this morning, but it's very much in harmony with the text this morning. We're going to be in Isaiah chapter 40 this morning. Isaiah chapter 40. And I want to go ahead and read you the passage, and then I'll talk to you just a little bit about the context. And then I will talk to you a little about what I think the right lessons for us are. So we'll look at Isaiah chapter 40, and we'll begin in verse 25, okay? And we'll read to the end of the chapter. To whom then will you liken me, or shall I be equal, saith the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things, that bringeth out their host by number. He calleth them all by names, by the greatness of his might, for that he is strong in power, not one faileth. What sayest thou, O Jacob, and speakest, O Israel? My way is hid from the Lord, and my judgment is passed over from my God. Hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard? That the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. So, I don't always give titles to messages, but if I gave you a title for this one, it would be, Do You Not Know, and Have You Not Heard? That is the beginning of verse 28. Do you not know, and have you not heard? Now, if we were going to talk about literary devices and poetic structure and that sort of thing, we would describe those as rhetorical questions, right? You know what that's like. You ask a question, you're not really asking a question. You ask a question, and the desire is a certain effect because you already know the answer to the question. And so the way I want to bring this passage to you this morning is really in terms of a set of rhetorical questions. I'll walk you through those here in just a couple minutes. Isaiah chapter 40 begins with a call or a cry of comfort for God's people. And if you're familiar at all with Isaiah 40, you may remember that Isaiah 40 goes on to speak of the voice of one who cries in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, and make straight in the desert a highway for our God. I'm not going to go ahead and just read all the rest of that to you. In the middle of this chapter, there is a sarcastic description of what it is to build and worship idols. And if you read that through, you'll see that there's a really, really sharp edge to that description of what it is to be an idol maker and an idol worshiper. And then we come to the passage that I read to you. And we begin our series of rhetorical questions. And so I'm just going to take this step by step in the time that we have together this morning and walk you through these rhetorical questions and really urge you to think about what the special music was about. Even in the middle of a storm, I will lift up my eyes to you because you are the one who helps me. The imagery here in Isaiah 40 is slightly different, but it is the same message. Our first rhetorical question in this passage in verses 25 and 26 is really who can be compared to the Holy One? Who can be compared to our God? The answer to that question, of course, is no one can. Make whatever idol you will make. In Isaiah's day, oftentimes idols were literally what we think of as idols. They were statues, and those statues represented in some way or another a god that they wanted to worship, and they would make various offerings in front of those statues, and they would pray to their God in front of that statue and that kind of thing. We may not have much of that in a literal sense here in our culture and in our day. But if you don't think that we build up idols that we pray to and worship, then you've not really thought much at all. Who can be compared to the Holy One? Who is the equal of our God? No one. And the call is to lift up your eyes, look up at the stars, look up at the sky and ask, who has created all of this? Who knows all of the hosts of heaven by number and calls them by name? He calls them out one by one, and not one is missing. The image there is really military. It's the roll call. He calls out his army of stars, and he knows all of their names, and not a single one is missing. And this is because of the greatness of his power. I'll try not to just beat you to death with this as we work through the passage this morning. But whatever you might be tempted to depend on, it can never be the equal of God. Now, I can't make you promises about this. I can give you a warning, but I cannot make you promises about this. Your idols will fail at some point. Now, that doesn't mean that the person that you depend on so much will necessarily die before you do. That does not mean that I can give you good, solid financial advice about when the next great panic or recession or depression will come and tell you what you need to do to protect yourself against that. But what I can warn you against is this. If and when that idol does fail, you are going to be empty and lost because you trusted in that and because you counted on that. There is no one, there is no thing that is the equal of the Holy One, that is the equal of our great God. The second of our rhetorical questions here, at least for me, hits me the hardest. Okay, I think this one's tough. Because verse 27 really asks us, why are you complaining? Why are you grumbling? Why are you whining so much? That is the idea in verse 27. Why sayest thou, O Jacob, and speakest, O Israel, my way is hid from the Lord, and my judgment is passed over from my God? Listen to that. You know you've talked like that before. You might have been talking like that last night. Lord, why are all these things happening to me? Why have you forgotten me? Why won't you do for me the things that I want done? Isaiah's response to that is, what are you doing? Why are you complaining? Now, we're going to get to the good part. I'm in the bad part right now, really. We're going to get to the good part. And we're going to get to a set of what are among the most beautiful promises in all of Scripture. I'll give you a little, saying or statement that I have heard in a number of places. I don't know who to credit this to. You know, the good news is not good news until you know bad news. I mean, think about that. The gospel is not the gospel. The good news can't really be the good news until we know what the bad news is. Another way of putting that, or another way of thinking about that, is to say that no one can ever be saved until he knows he's lost. No one can ever come to salvation until he knows he needs it. And so that's why these questions are so forceful. I think maybe we can read these questions in two ways. These questions may be questions that are addressed to people who do not know the Lord and who need to come to know Him. These questions, I think even better, are addressed to people who do know who the Lord is. They have heard these things, but they're forgetting them, or they're in danger of forgetting them. I don't want to take a lot of our time this morning with historical background, but I think that it is worth noting that Isaiah was alive in a very difficult time in the life of the kingdom of Judah. During Isaiah's lifetime, the city of Jerusalem was besieged by the Assyrian army, and there seemed no hope of deliverance from that army. Now, miraculous deliverance came. I'm not going to go through that story with you. But Isaiah went on to warn in his later ministry that an even darker time was coming in the future. And much of what we see from Isaiah chapter 40 all the way through to the end of that book is encouragement for God's people when the next dark time comes. I promise you that at the end we will look at the good things. But dark times are coming. I'm not trying to speak as a prophet. If you ever think that I'm trying to speak as a prophet, get them to turn off my mic and get them to shut down the live feed. I want to make sure that I don't fall into that trap and fall into that foolishness. But it doesn't take a genius. It doesn't take a Sherlock Holmes level of deductive thought to be able to come to the conclusion, a very reasonable conclusion, that dark times will come. They do. That's not the question. The question is not, will you and I face dark times? The question really is, when will you and I face dark times? And what will be the darkness of those times? Because those times come. That is what it is to live in this sin, sick, and fallen world that we live in. In Isaiah's day, the dark time was a conquering army that was ultimately miraculously turned back. In Isaiah's time, the darkness was a nation that had largely given itself over to idolatry. In other times, the darkness takes other forms. In our individual lives, the darkness and the difficulties may come in different ways. I don't mean Great Depression style nationwide events, but people fall on hard financial times. Not because they've done anything wrong necessarily, but because sometimes that is what happens. We have to deal with illness. We have to deal with death. And so the question is never really, will there be dark times? The question is, when will they be and what will they be? But those dark times will come. So who are you going to look to? Are you really going to look at your Lord and complain? And that is the rebuke in the question that is in verse 27. Why do you complain? Why do you say about your great God that you have been forgotten and that no one listens to you? And then verse 28 asks that pair of questions that I said would really serve as the title for this sermon. Do you not know? And have you not heard? Think about that. You know. And you have heard. Well, act like you know. And act like you have heard. You know. And you've heard. You're getting ready to hear it again, because we're going to go the rest of the way through this chapter. So you know and you have heard. Now, start already moving into the good stuff. I got one more rhetorical question to give you, but in verse 28, we're already moving into the good stuff in this lesson, in this sermon. Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard? And then the reminder of what we know and what we've heard. The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. Think about yourself. Just think about yourself right now. I know you're not used to hearing that from the pulpit perhaps, but think about yourself. Forget everybody else for right now. Just think about you. Think about you. Have you ever been worn out and weak? Don't think about anybody else right now, just you. Have you ever been worn out and weak? Have you ever just been tired? Maybe you were worn out and weak because you had battled illness and it overwhelmed you. It took you maybe even to the very gates of death. And then it was months and months and months and months maybe before you could feel yourself regaining your strength. Maybe it's financial struggle that has just worn you down. You keep waking up in the night thinking about it. Every decision that you make is the wrong decision. Every avenue that you explore is the wrong one. And you're just tired of it, and you can't stand it anymore, and you can't take it anymore. You are tired. You are weak. You are worn out. Maybe it's family pressures. Maybe it's conflict inside your family. Maybe it's a coworker that you just can't get along with, but y'all got to sit beside each other every day. And you just wish they would take a sick day, and they won't. And you got to deal with them again. And it wears you out, and it wears you down. You hate it. God never gets tired. He never grows weary. And you know that. And you have heard that. And you should remember that. Look up to Him and cry out to Him. Because as tired as you are, He's not tired. As worn out as you are, He's not worn out. As ready to give up as you might be, He's not giving up. He's not giving up. The last part of verse 28 tells us that His understanding of things is unsearchable, inscrutable, unfathomable. He sees all the way down to the bottom of everything. I don't imagine you have to hit and hold that rewind button for very long at all to take yourself back to a time when things didn't make sense. I mean, for some of us, the rewind button's got to go back to yesterday afternoon, and things just didn't make sense. For others of us, I mean, maybe it's a couple weeks. I don't know. Maybe you're one of those fortunate and blessed souls, and you can hold that rewind button down, and you got to go back a couple years to get yourself to a spot, to a time when it just didn't make sense, and you couldn't understand it. And the harder you tried to make sense of it, and the harder you tried to understand it, the more lost you became. Just none of it fits together. God's never in that spot. There is no searching out of. There is no getting down to the bottom of His understanding. He knows it all. He sees it all from the very beginning to the very end. And He is your God. And He's asking you the question, have you not heard? Do you not know? Have you not considered these things? Have you held up all of these different things that you want to believe in and trust in and compared them to me and seen how inadequate they are? And you're really going to sit right there and complain about it? I mean, that's where God's going with all these things here. Now, I kind of had to make up my own rhetorical question for the last verses, because when we get to the last verses, Isaiah's done with rhetorical questions, okay? When we look at verses 29 through 31, this is the meat, this is the potatoes, this is the gravy, this is everything. This is the richest, best part of it all. There's no more rebuke. No more sarcasm. I don't hesitate for one moment to say that when Isaiah is asking these questions on the Lord's behalf, there's sarcasm in there. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Why do you complain? All those things. That's not being gentle. That's grabbing you by your collar and telling you to look at and to think about the things that you're supposed to look at and the things that you are supposed to think about. So my made-up rhetorical question for verses 29 through 31 is this: do you not remember what the Lord does for His people? He gives power to the faint, and to them that have no might, He increases or multiplies strength. Even the youths will faint and be weary, and the young men will utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord, they will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. And they will walk and not faint. Now we're going to walk through some of that for a few minutes here as we close, because what I want to do with you spiritually here this morning is what I like to do at a meal. I want my meal to end with a sweet taste in my mouth, right? I want to come down to the end of it and have something good, wonderful, filling, satisfying. There's a rumor at my house that there might be a cobbler later today. And I hope that does happen. I'll only be mildly disappointed if it doesn't. But that's the sort of thing that will satisfy you, because it's so sweet and it's so good and it's so filling. That's what verses 29 through 31 here in this chapter 40 of Isaiah are. That sweet and satisfying filling into what we might call spiritual meal. Some tough meat to chew on in those early verses. There's some strong flavors that you get in those early verses. I have no idea if it's okay for me to tell this or not, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump in and hope for the best. I'm getting a scowl from my wife because she thinks this is going to be a story about her, but it's not. A long, long time ago, my sister-in-law decided that, for whatever reason, it would be a good idea to make a chicken dish with curry. Now, if you like curry, I'm glad you do. Eat it all up so I don't have to eat any of it, okay? It's not something that I care much for. I just don't. I'm sorry. That may represent weakness and bad taste and all that, but there it is. And so my sister-in-law makes this curry chicken dish, and she's invited Sherry and me over, and we sit down, and I am just sweating, and my eyes are watering, and we're eating this thing. And my brother nicknames this dish gunpowder chicken because it had such a hot, almost explosive taste to it. Well, there's some gunpowder stuff up here in these early verses. There's some finger wagging stuff up here in these early verses. Who are you going to compare God to? That's right, nobody. What's the matter with you? Have you not heard these things? Don't you know these things? You know you do. When we get to verse 29, we've got the sweet, okay? We've got that cobbler. We've got that big old bowl of ice cream. We've got that thing that's just going to fill us up and make us so glad. If you're weak, He gives you power. And if you're running out of strength, He will put His hand on you and He will give you strength. Now you got to understand, now you got to look to Him for it, and you got to ask Him for it, and you got to know who He is, and you got to know that He's going to do it. He tells His people that. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord. That's what Amy and Jessica were singing about. No matter how many tears I shed, no matter how bad that storm is, I can look up there, and there He is. And what's He got? He's got good people. He's got good things for His people. He's got help to offer to His people. You may not be weak this morning. Good. You may not be struggling this morning. Good. Give thanks to God for that. Praise Him for that. Be glad of that. There is absolutely zero shame in living during a period of time in blessing in your life and recognizing it as blessing and praising God for it and thanking Him for it. If you are in that spot, that is good. You may not always be in that spot. Because there are some people in this congregation right now who are in a dark spot. They are in a dark time. They are in some of their toughest struggles ever. Now, these words are the words for God's people at all times and in all places, but these words are especially words for God's people in their times of struggle and in their times of difficulty, in their times of weakness and tiredness, and in their times when they are tempted to turn to an idol, even though they've heard and even though they know that the idols cannot measure up to the Lord and that the idols cannot give the help that they need. He'll give you power if you're weak. And He will increase your strength even when you don't have any at all. I thought I would never be like this. You know how that goes. You're growing up and you know that you're going to always be better than the people who are older than you are. And then you get old enough to know that, well, okay, maybe not. I never really thought that as I got older and I began to experience those getting older things, right? For a good while, I would say maybe 30s and much of my 40s, I could pretty much do anything that I could do in my 20s. I was just a little slower to get over it. But now, I can just reach right out there and touch 60. And it don't work that way no more. I can't do everything that I used to do. What I actually do is I tell Seth what needs to be done, and I fold my arms, and then I stand back and I watch how good he is at doing it. And I think, that's right, that's my boy. And I try not to let on that I need him to do it because I just can't anymore. Okay? You know what? When you're young, you think that strength is always going to be there. And I think that spiritually sometimes that happens with us too. I don't know all your spiritual experience, but you do. You think back and you remember your spiritual experience. Man, I can remember. I know my mom and daddy must have thought I had completely lost my mind. Coming home from either some sort of youth revival thing, or it might have been VBS. I don't know. All that kind of fades as you get decades and decades from it. And I was declaring to them that I was ready to be a missionary. Well, you know this. I mean, even Christian mamas and daddies don't want their youngins to come and want to be missionaries, right? Because that's just, they're going to go live in a foreign country, and they're going to get all kind of foreign diseases, and you're going to see them once every 3 years. I mean, Christian mamas and daddies don't want their Christian kids showing up and saying, I want to be a missionary. Well, I remember telling my mom and daddy that, all you needed if you want to be a missionary was Bible. Well, actually, you need a whole lot more than that, right? I was that little baby believer who was full of strength and enthusiasm, and since I had my little Bible, I could just go win the whole world for Jesus because I had the Bible, and the Bible was all you needed to do that. There's nothing wrong with enthusiasm. There's nothing wrong with the energy of youth. And when you're young, either physically or spiritually, you tend, I'm afraid, to assume that there will never be times of struggle. And there will never be times of weakness, and there will never be times of difficulty. We will have question and answer with Mark Wakefield next Sunday morning. And without even trying, as he begins to answer questions about what is going on in his ministry, you're going to see difficulty and struggle at what is for most of us virtually an unimaginable level. He knows that. He's seen that. He goes through that. Now, he's also very enthusiastic. That's one of the things that's so pleasant about hearing Mark speak about his service. No matter how young you are, the time when you get tired is coming. And no matter how strong a strong young man may be, the time of falling and failure comes. I know it sounds like I've lied and I'm not giving you good stuff anymore, but hold on. That's there. Even for the young, even for the strong. But verse 31 is that scoop of homemade ice cream on top of that cobbler. If there wasn't already a rumor of that, I've started the rumor of that, right? That scoop of homemade ice cream on top of that cobbler. Those who wait on, those who hope in, those who look at and look to, those whose eyes are turned expectantly to the Lord, their strength is renewed. I don't care how strong you are now. If you try to go on in your own strength, it will run out. I can't tell you when, and I can't tell you how, but I can tell you it'll run out. Wait on the Lord. Hope in Him. Look to Him. And you will renew your strength. You will be like an eagle lifting up and flying off. And if you've ever seen that, you know that's pretty impressive. That thing shouldn't be able to do that, but it does. If you wait on the Lord, if you look to Him, and if you hope in Him, that's what you will do. You can keep on running and not tire out. And it's not because you've got a new diet regimen or you found this workout or this supplement that is just going to keep you strong all the time. No, it's because you wait on the Lord. You hope in Him and you look to Him and He gives you that. You can run and run and run and run and not be weary. And if you're not in a Sunday school class right now, you need to come to the doers classroom back here next Sunday morning and hear Mark talk about the ministry among those young men in Guatemala. And then you need to come back to that same room the next week, because I'm going to talk to you from Hebrews chapter 12 about running that race after you have laid aside all of the weights that would hold you back. And you may not think you need to hear that, but you do. You don't necessarily have to hear it from me 2 Sundays from now, but you know what I'm talking about. You need that. You need to know that that is there for you. And you can walk and keep on walking and keep on walking and keep on walking and not wear out. If you wait on the Lord, if you hope in Him. You see, you know that, and you've heard that. Sometimes you forget that. I know that. I've heard that. Sometimes I forget that. Let's help each other to remember that if we wait on the Lord, we will renew our strength. We won't fall and fail and curl up and give up. We will mount up on wings like eagles, and we will be able to keep on running without tiring out and keep on walking and never grow weak. We're going to have a time of invitation, and if you need to come down to the front and pray, if you would like to come down and speak with me about anything at all, you can do that, but we'll have this time of invitation with the praise team right now.